Hello, this is Karen Johnson, and we are today doing another one in a series of the Proctors Historical Interviews. The date today is July 11th, 2016, and we're very, very pleased to have all of you watching, and we're particularly pleased to have Penny Scacco here, whose parents were in vaudeville. And that is a great thing, and she's come here from New Jersey. She decided to make a connection with us, and she has a great deal to share with us about her parents and the things she knows about vaudeville. So Penny, just go ahead and talk about your mom and dad.
Thank you very much. Well, it's a wonderful opportunity to be here today. This is the city of my birth. My mother was born in Emporia, Kansas, in the year 1901 on January 8th. Her father was the youngest engineer on the Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe Railroad. And his father was the oldest engineer on that railroad. Unfortunately, both men were killed on that railroad. So my grandmother was widowed very early on in her life with 3 little girls. And my Aunt Frances was probably around 5, my mother was 2, and my Aunt Irene was a year old. So she went back to her hometown of Chicago, Illinois, and she moved in with her sister, Henny, and her husband, Hank. As the days progressed, my mother and sisters would play show in their bathroom. And what they were doing, my Aunt Frances was mimicking the sound of a piano sound, because they did have a piano in their front parlor, but that was forbidden. The only way you got in there was if somebody died. But anyway. But her mother and aunt would go out to these seances. So that was their time to play and have a show in the bathroom. And then they progressed through the house and did their thing. So at the time, you could go to a 5 and 10 cent store and hear these song pluggers sell their wares of the sheet music of the time. Well, Frances was 8 years old, moving on up through the years, and my mother was 6, and her sister was 4, but my mother had the dominant voice. She really stood out, and as luck would have it, a man that was working in this song plugger's store came out. And he just couldn't believe that this gorgeous voice was coming out of this little kid's mouth. So he went up to my Aunt Frances and said, "I'd like you to come in and talk to me." Well, she was pretty street smart for a little kid her age. And she said, "I'll come back tomorrow with my mother and my aunt." So they did. Well, the girls were invited into the store, and my mother sang with the piano accompaniment for the first time. And she was hired on the spot to sing in theaters, in the vaudeville theaters. But the stipulation was she had to be chaperoned. So my Aunt Henny jumped at the chance because she'd be paid $2.50 a week. And my mother was paid $5 a week. Well, as the years progressed, my mother was also discovered by some very famous music publishers, and she was hired to sing in a lot of the prominent stores in the Chicago area, and she did also still work in the vaudeville houses. Her great opportunity came when she was 12 years old, and she was signed onto the Orpheum circuit, which was the best circuit at that point in time, and she was booked to go to the West Coast to California to perform. Well, I remember her telling this story to me, And it really was with pride, and at that point of her career, it was very, very special. As the years progressed, she saw that Aunt Henny was keeping back all this great money that she was making. I mean, when she was 8 years old, she was making $40 a week. And that was more than a man could make in a month. And as the years progressed, the money kept increasing. Well, by the time my mother was 15, she said she had enough of this, and she kind of told a little fib and said she was older than she was, so she wouldn't have to be chaperoned by this greedy aunt. And so she got her freedom, so to speak. So as luck would have it, she met a young gal by the name of Doris Robbins, and she teamed up with her, and they were booked in several theaters throughout the United States, and she was with her for quite a long time. There was a song at the time called Two Little Girls in Blue, and the costuming was a beautiful Southern belle dress where the skirt was a Siamese skirt, but two separate bodices and beautiful sunbottoms. Well, my mother's, one of her striking features, I should say, was her auburn hair, and it was curly as anything. And she had these long ringlets, and she had auburn hair, and Doris had dark brown hair, and they made for quite a striking duo. In 1922, they were performing in Ohio, and my father happened to be in the theater at the time, and he just fell in love with my mother on sight, and he just hung around backstage all week long so he could meet her. So, my mother, I should say, she knew Milton Berle as a child star. She knew Sophie Tucker. She knew the Mills Brothers, Sammy Davis Jr., father and uncle, who were hoofers or tap dancers, which hoofers is another word for that. And so anyway, as the years went by, she fell in love with my father, as I say, and in 1925 they married. So he was on a separate circuit, so they were going to see each other and playing different cities. So she decided to get off the Orpheum circuit and take get onto an inferior circuit so she could be in the East where he was performing. And at that point in time, the other gal left the act because, my mother was breaking up the act, obviously. So she soon met this gal by the name of Genevieve Barry, and she played piano and she also sang. So they worked together for a couple of years. And my mother did play Proctors probably either in 1926 or 1927, because I just found out recently that this theater was completed, I should say, in 1920 and 26, yes. So anyway, she traveled all through the United States. She even went up into Canada. There's other pictures home and other albums that I have. But, she loved it. She was in it when she was 6 years old, all the way up till into her late 20s. long time. Now, my father, his name was, oh, did I say? I should have, I'm sorry. I didn't say to tell you my mother's name, did
Well, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Her name was Loretta Rollo, R-O-L-L.
And that was her real name?
That was her real name, and she went by her real name, yes. My father was born in Bellingham, Washington, in the late 1800s. And he had one brother. And he, unfortunately, his parents divorced early on, so he lived with his aunt, which was his mother's sister. And at the age of 17, he decided to move to Seattle. And he got a job as a night clerk, working 12-hour shifts. And there happened to be a theater there called the Palace. And this was probably in 1912. And it was a continuous vaudeville, starting from noon to 11 o'clock at night. So, act upon act upon act, the same acts were revolving. So he would just sit there by the hour, even though he put on a long day, and just watch these acts and kind of just learn the craft and the subtleties and the technique and all this. But he found out early on that he was able to sing, and he could play by ear. And this hotel where he worked at had a big banquet hall. It had an old upright piano. So one day he went in there and he started playing, and his voice was a baritone. And he had the idea that he wanted to form a trio. So during one of these times that he went to the Palace, he saw this little gal, and she was a soloist there performing, and her act was called the Warbling Lark. About 5 foot high, dark hair, very shapely. Well, she had a gorgeous soprano voice. So he said to himself, boy, I bet she'd be a great component to my trio. I got to meet her. So he looked up on the register to see if she was booked there, and she was. And he waited patiently for like about 3 or 4 days, and he finally was able to see her one morning. And so he told her who he was and what his ideas were, and he had seen her and all this good stuff. And she thought it was a great idea. She says, but you know what? I got to complete this tour, and I got to go to Walla Walla, Washington, to complete my tour. So he said, okay. He said, oh, I'll quit my job, and I'll follow you there and all this. So she completed her tour. And so obviously, he needed funds, to keep on the road there. And they finally got a job through an ad in the paper in the Winnehatchee Valley outside of Seattle. And it was an apple orchard. So Pat was very talented to be able to yodel. She was a great yodelist, and that was very, very difficult to do if you did it correctly. So anyway, all of a sudden, they heard an echo come back, yodeling. And he said to Pat, do it again. And she did it again, and it came back again. Well, it was a man's beautiful tenor voice. So finally, the guy showed himself, and he had his pants legs rolled up, his hat turned back, and he was very comedic. They could tell he had a lot of talent, plus a beautiful voice. And his name was Bob Renstrom. Her name was Pat Mayo. So eventually their trio's name was Bar, Mayo, and Wren. But in the beginning, their trio's name was the Superlative Three. So, as I said, this was 1912. So they, worked at odd jobs and all this good stuff to save up enough money for a little wardrobe. And then they found a booker for small-time acts. And they finally got work in real low-class houses, nothing great, but it was work and they would be seen. So finally, they got booked into a little bit larger town in Washington. And there was a man there that was called a browser. What this was with these people, he was like a talent scout, go around from place to place, just scouting out know people to see if, he could book them as he could be their agent, I should say. So anyway, he approached them, got them to sign a contract, and he says, you know what? He says, I know Alexander Pantages. Well, Alexander Pantages had his own vaudeville circuit. And so the day finally came, and they auditioned for him. They had 3 songs in their repertoire because my father was a real stickler, over and over again in the rehearsals, and there'd be many arguments and all this business going on, but he wanted perfection. And so anyway, they sang Caroline in the morning, and they sang at the end The Lost Chord. And Pantages was just blown away. He just thought they were fantastic. So he said, I would like to sign you. Well, as it turned out, that this contract that my father signed was for 10 years. Unbeknown to my father, and he didn't read the fine print, as they say. So there was only 1 year into that contract that they had served. So obviously, as he was phrased in my brother's book about my father, that they were in slavery for 9 more years. Well, it turned out that Pantages bought out the contract for $2,000, and they were able to be booked into the Pantages circuit. And they were sent through Oregon, different parts of Washington, and finally to San Francisco and to Sacramento, which was the real big time, competing with the Orpheum circuit. And many a night they stopped the show, so much so the curtain wouldn't drop and they'd come back for encore upon encore. And as the years progressed, from I'd say 1914 to 1922, they were with Pantages. And the money kept rolling in, and they were really doing well. They were like up to about $750 a week, which was a lot of money at that time. And so finally, they really wanted to get into the get on the Orpheum circuit, so they thought that they would go with Keith Albee. So they did that, and Pantages wished them well, and they talked to their agent again after they'd been with Keith Albee for a while, and asked him if he could get them onto the Orpheum. And apparently there was some politics going on within his life with those other people, and he said, I'm sorry, but I really can't do anything for you right at the moment, but be patient. So finally, they were signed on with Orpheum. But my father was recognized by Fred Astaire, Bert Lahr, Buster Keaton, the Mills brother, loads, and Gracie Allen, and George Burns, and but they were respected by their peers, and that was, they finally made the big time. There was one point in the earlier part of my father's career that he'd go outside and he'd look at the marquee and he would say, "They came to see me. They came to see me." But unfortunately, in 1927, they were wiring these vaudeville houses for sound, for talking pictures. And this was the death knell for vaudeville. And he thought at the time, oh, this is a newfangled fad, it'll never take, it'll never fly. Well, unfortunately, it did. And by 1928, vaudeville was dead. And as far as my father was concerned, he really never gave up. He just couldn't accept that this was all, it was all over. Backing up a trifle, I just want to tell you of another opportunity that my father's trio had. They happened to go to a club in Greenwich Village in New York one night. And they were told if they went there, they might be seen by somebody who could do something for them. Well, as it turned out, there was this man that critiqued acts. So after they were done, he came over to them and he says, "You know what?" He said, "Irving Berlin is getting together a musical called Coconuts with the Marx Brothers." And he says, "I can get you an audition with Irving Berlin." So they waited a couple days, they rehearsed, and had their repertoire down pat. They went, they sang for Berlin. Berlin got up from the piano because he accompanied them, and he walked over to his assistant, came back. He asked them if they had anything else, and they came up a few other songs. And so Berlin said, "I'd love to have you all in my cast." And he said, "But all I can offer you at this point in time is $250 a week." Well, Bobby always was looking for more money. And my father saw that this was their foot in the door. A great opportunity. But all Bobby said to Mr. Berlin was, "We'll think it over." So Irving Berlin said, "Okay, call me in the morning." So they called him in the morning, and my father and Bobby had several arguments the evening before, and so they asked Berlin if he could pay $500. Berlin said, "I'm sorry, the budget is tight. We just can't do it. Can't do it. Thank you for coming in and auditioning." But what a shame. And that show was a really big show, and that would have been a segue to other musicals in the future. But so my father bought property up in the Adirondacks in New York State, and at one point he owned 300 acres, 28 lakefront lots. My mother ran that resort up there for about 40 years, and that's where I called home for many years, Indian Lake, New York, up in the heart of the Adirondacks.
So you have such great stories and you tell them so well. It's wonderful. How does what's the source of this information? Could you talk about that a little bit?
Well, when my brother was 21 years old, he told my father that he was going to write a book about my father's life. So finally, 2 years before my brother unfortunately passed away, at the age of 69, he wrote the book. And then it was edited by my nephew. And he said in the beginning of the book that, yes, this is a story about our father's life. I don't mean to slight our mother because she was in show business a lot earlier, at an earlier age, and a lot longer. And he said, I will tell her story a little bit more at the the end of the book, and he did. But it's broken down into about 25, 30 chapters, and I think that is, is the gist of the information, facts-wise, with years and different things happening. But I did hear a lot of stories from my mother growing up, in different
So you've put
experiences.
everything together that you've heard.
Yeah.
So could you just talk about, if you know, what a vaudeville circuit is? Because I'm not sure that everybody is quite aware of that.
Well, of apparently I think it was the Keith Circuit, was like about 16 states. Like I think it was the Northeast, and that it encompassed. It started out with Keith, Albee. There also was a Proctors circuit.
That Mr. Proctor, our
Started.
Mr. Proctor.
There was Pantages, and this was that one was a little bit under the Orpheum circuit, which was the best circuit of the day. Even Joe Kennedy, our President Kennedy's father, even got into the act. I think that was with RKO. I think. Now, a typical vaudeville bill would have been jugglers, acrobats, a dog act, skits, maybe a couple of singing groups, but probably the best slot to be in would have been the fourth slot. My father said, unfortunately, in one small house, they came in and they were in the first slot. That was the worst slot anybody could have ever put you in, because these people are coming into the theater, sitting down, talking amongst themselves, not paying attention. And a lot of times, the people that were running theater were not really trying to quiet everybody down or waiting to give the cue to come on and hold them back in the wings before they came on the stage proper, see.
So the fourth one was like the top billed one.
The top bill, the fourth, the fifth. But, if you got like the end ones, they weren't that great.
But then didn't the whole thing start over in many cases? Or did you go to a vaudeville show and there was a set program, or was it continuous?
Well, as I said before, now this continuous vaudeville that I said my father went to in Seattle, that was really vaudeville at its most primitive, if you will. It wasn't that sophisticated. It was just the idea that anybody who wanted to catch any entertainment at all, didn't matter what time they came in, they could come in at any point in time. It wouldn't matter, and they could stay, and they could see the beginning ones if they had missed those, and on like that. What was I going to say?
Well, Mr. Proctor, was an equilibrist who played in vaudeville, our Mr. Proctor of the Proctors group.
He was
an equilibrist. He did acrobatic demonstrations, I guess you'd call it.
Oh, really?
So that was, there are some parts of vaudeville entertainment that are pretty different from what we're used to today, for sure. And it's, of course, I keep thinking of the Lawrence Welk show has kind of some elements of vaudeville in it.
That's right.
The costumes, and if someone wanted to get a flavor. But it was part of our history, not for too long, but for a while because we opened in 26.
Yes, but vaudeville started in the late 1800s, I think, and it was started in France. It was started
Okay.
in France.
Well, they're great stories, so can you think of anything else you'd like to tell us? Because you've told us a lot already, obviously.
Well, my mother and father, as I said, were born in excuse me. My mother and father were married in 1925, in August of 1925. My brother was born in 1927. And they decided to carry him on the road rather than have her stay home because eventually, I should have said, and I guess you can, is it if I say this, it'll just be taken out?
Whatever.
I'm talking about the order of my. Anyway, she left that other partner and joined my father's trio because because the other lady wanted to stop show business. So my mother joined my father's trio, and as I said, they got married, and so when the baby came along, they decided to carry him on the road. Well, at one point in time, Ginger Rogers held him.
So that's your brother we're talking about, the writer of the book.
Right. Ginger Rogers held him. She was
nice.
his babysitter at the time. Gertrude Elderly, the first American who ever swam the English Channel, held him, too. And also, my mother went to dancing school as a child, and one of her classmates was Barbara Stanwyck.
Well, you've had quite a wonderful history, and I'm so pleased that you came here from New Jersey today with your family. I know you have other family in the area, and you're celebrating a family occasion, but we are very grateful that you took the time to talk to us about Proctors, because it's exciting to talk to somebody whose relative, whose mom appeared on our stage. It's great.
Well, one thing she said about this theater, it was one of the most beautiful theaters that she had played ever. And she had been in a lot of theaters in this country. But after learning also that it was brand new, it must have been gorgeously decorated.
Right.
In its time with all that beautiful work in the proscenium and everything.
Well, you're going to get, your whole family's going to have a tour of the theater, and you can see how we have stewarded it over the years. So thank you so much, and I want to thank our viewers for joining us to talk to Penny Scacco, who has family connections with vaudeville in Schenectady and Proctors, and this is part of the Schenectady History Committee's effort to preserve the oral history, and today's date is July 11th, 2016, and we want to thank all you for watching.